Geometry Dash is a 2D game, right? Right? Of course it is. But that hasn't stopped people from trying to make 3D levels in the game's level editor. As updates have gone by, the 3D effects that are possible in the editor have gotten better and better. These days, people can even make 3D renders in-game and even move the camera around a 3D scene. But the thing about all these levels is that the gameplay is entirely 2D. People call these 3D levels, but think about it. All the gameplay takes place on a flat plane with no variance in height or depth depending on the level. They have 3D effects and even some 3D rendering, but that really only makes them 2.5D, which is still really cool to achieve in a 2D game. Even my last level, Rainbow Cart, is like this. Sure, it has a jump animation, but I don't really consider it a 3D level. I did clarify in my video explaining that level that it's not really 3D. Oh, and also I said, I think we've still got some time before someone makes actual 3D gameplay. Yeah, I lied. I already had the engine for this level working when I wrote that in the script, and the level was basically done when that video went up. I wanted this level to be a surprise, although with future levels I'll probably start posting previews for them. Back to the point, Rainbow Cart. It's not really a 3D level, so when people started calling it one, I wanted to prove them wrong by making an actual 3D platformer. Here's how I did that. The gameplay for this level is somehow actually kind of simple. Let me explain. In any game where the player can move, the game needs to be able to keep track of where you are. In a 2D game, this is done using a pair of coordinates, like a GPS. One coordinate keeps track of your movement along the x-axis, and the other keeps track of your movement along the y-axis. Together, these numbers can specify exactly where the player is. Geometry Dash already keeps track of x and y coordinates for the player, and in platformer mode, you can freely move around on both axes. But to make a 3D level, I need to add one more axis, the z-axis. Unfortunately, Geometry Dash won't do this for me. Or will it? You see, Geometry Dash will only keep track of 2 coordinates for your player. However, if we have a second player, that's an extra set of coordinates, which means that we can use player 2 as a z-axis. So my system for 3D motion is this. Player 1 can move left and right to control your x-coordinate, and move up and down for your y-coordinate. Player 2 gets trapped at the same height as player 1, and its left and right movement will control your z-coordinate. Great, now we have 3D motion in Geometry Dash. That wasn't so bad. But just motion isn't enough. We also need gameplay, and I can't exactly just put regular gameplay in here and expect it to work. I need to do a bit more than that. But first, I had to actually design the gameplay. I started making some, but I realized pretty quickly that trying to design 3D gameplay in a 2D game is a good way to give myself a headache. So instead I just opened up a 3D game and built 10 levels for my platformer there, generally trying to gradually introduce new mechanics over the course of the full level. Now I have a plan for the gameplay, but how can I translate that into Geometry Dash? Well, each 3D level can be sliced into a bunch of 2D slices of gameplay. Each level is 10 slices wide, so I built 1/10 of the gameplay 10 times. Then I did that again going the other horizontal direction, and then took all the slices and assigned each one to a different group. With this, we now have the gameplay for the level in Geometry Dash. Now it's time to put the 3D motion and 3D gameplay together and finish the 3D engine. First, each player is trapped in a separate area that's 10 blocks wide. Then I lined each area with collision blocks, one for each slice, and set them to follow each player vertically, as well as collision blocks that follow the player horizontally as well. The idea is that anytime a player collision block touches a slice's collision block, that slice gets toggled on, and when they stop touching, the slice gets toggled off. The trick here is that the collision blocks each player can interact with actually control the other player's slices. That is, if player 1 moves left and right, it changes what gameplay player 2 has. And vice versa, player 2 can move left and right to control player 1's gameplay. And with that, the 3D engine is pretty much complete. Now, to transition from one level to the next, I need to do 2 things. Each player has to move back to their starting location, and the next level has to move in. I didn't want to just teleport the player for this, so the way it works is that each player has a box constantly following them, but toggled off. Anytime you reach the end of the level, both boxes get toggled on, trapping both players, and then they gradually move to each player's starting location. Meanwhile, the gameplay gets instantly moved out of the way for this animation, and the next level is instantly moved into place when it finishes. What's nice about doing it this way is that it saves me the work of actually animating this, since the cube sprite you see is constantly following both players' movements anyway. And with that, we have a fully playable level. But that doesn't really matter yet, since we can't actually see it. It's time to make the level visible, and the thing is, everything up until this point was the easy part, so here we go. I decided to keep things simple and just have the level use an isometric style. I also decided to use a simple 1.0 style block palette for a few reasons. I think it fits well with the isometric style, it feels fitting for what to my knowledge is the first level with fully 3D gameplay. It also forces me to use this grid texture, which I think is easier to navigate. And also, yeah, it's easier to do. Like, I know I'm making a 3D level here, but actually decorating it might be a bit much to ask for. I put together some fake blocks and used the warp feature to make them look like sides of 3D blocks. I would have just used real blocks, but then I wouldn't be able to copy and paste them for some reason. After making a block palette, I started recreating each level I'd designed with them, making sure that different parts of each level were placed on different Z layers. I also applied a pinch shader to the background to make it look more like a 3D environment, and added a slight bit of decoration to it. One detail I like here is that the icons moving by in the background actually change during the ball sections. Then I made this cube using some more warping, and just like Yoshi in Rainbow Kart, made it use your player color. Now I just needed to make it follow your movements. To do this, I made 3 more objects. The first one follows player 1's vertical movement, and the other 2 follow each player's horizontal movement. Then I set up area move triggers to angle the movement of those last 2 objects. After that, all I had to do was make the player sprite follow all 3 of these objects. Now you can actually see the player sprite move around. We're getting close. I also made a ball sprite which can be swapped in and out for ball gameplay. What's nice about the ball gameplay is that in order to make it, I just needed to place a ball portal for each player, and it just works. In fact, every platformer game mode other than Spider works. The reason there are no robot or jetpack sections is because I didn't want to make animations for them, and platformer UFO didn't feel very good in 3D, but they do work in the engine I made. But the hardest part of making this level is that the player sometimes has to appear in front of or behind certain objects, and it changes depending on where you are in each level. So I made several copies of both player sprites, placed them on different Z layers, and filled each level with a bunch of touch-activated spawn triggers and state blocks to basically toggle on those different sprites depending on where you are in the level. It took a long time to get it to look good for each level, and there probably are still ways to glitch out the layering, but it doesn't seem to happen if you're actually trying to beat the level. And that should be just about everything that needs explaining in this level. The one thing I really don't like about this level is that since Geometry Dash wasn't made with 3D in mind, the controls here don't feel all that great, especially on mobile, and it seems everyone else agrees with me on this. I tried to make it bearable by never requiring diagonal movement in the level. You can do it, but you don't have to. I've also had people ask to make player 2's jump work, which I agree would be a big improvement. Unfortunately, in order for that to work without any bugs, I think RobTop would have to add a trigger which forces a player input. And you know, I bet auto levels would love to have that too. If he adds that, I'll put it in the level. So am I going to make more 3D levels? Well, I will if I figure out a new way to innovate on this idea. But I also have other ideas for levels I want to make, including a gimmick that I'm honestly surprised I haven't seen done yet, since it was doable in 2.1. And who knows, maybe someday I'll even use a gradient trigger in one of my levels. Or maybe I'll double down on not using them, who knows. All that said, thanks for watching, subscribe or something.